speaker. And she is Professor Ying at the City University of New York and at the Hong Kong Baptist University. She's also a visiting fellow at the Oriental Institute at Oxford and a visiting professor in film studies at Columbia in New York City. Professor Zhu's research encompassed China's cinema and media, China-Hollywood relations, as well as TV drama and online streaming. Arguably, in the contemporary world, it is the last, which is the most important issue now. She has published very widely, including 10 books. I'll only mention the most recent 2 books, as well as the book that she has just finished. The 2 most recent books are Soft Power with Chinese Characteristics, China's Campaign for Hearts and Minds, which came out in 2019. The other is 2 Billion Eyes, the story of China Central Television, which came out in 2013. Her new book is Hollywood in China, Behind the Scenes of the World's Largest Movie Market. The subject of her talk today is from Netflix to iQiyi, as the world turns, serial dramas in virtual circulation. Now, at the end of Professor Zhu's presentation, if you would like to ask any questions or make any comment, please use the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you would like to raise a question anonymously, you are welcome to do so, but please say that when at the start of your questions, I will then respect your wishes. But even then, it would be very helpful to me as moderator to know who you are so that I can organize the Q&A sessions more effectively. With that, let me hand over to our speaker, Professor Ying Zhu. Over to you, Ying.
Thank you, Steve, for the generous introduction. And I wish also, of course, to thank China Center at the SOAS to have me here and to share my research with you. And I'm actually essentially using SOAS as a guinea pig for this particular talk, because this is something that I've just started to look at, and it's very, very raw. So my talk today discusses interplay between serial dramas and streaming services in China and the US, the 2 leading countries in content production and circulation in terms of volume, in the era of the so-called instantaneous and globalized virtual binge consumption ecosystem, right? That's where we live now. And this is a new topic that I, like I said, I've just started to look into. So my talk mostly serves to establish a context and also a background for future research. So I'm actually very keen to hear your comments, suggestions, and so on and so forth. And the talk, I realized, might be a bit more suitable to media studies colleagues and students, but the part about China hopes to be of some relevance to China studies colleagues. Let me actually share the screen. Oops, here. Okay, so like many or some of you, I watch serial dramas from time to time, especially during the COVID lockdown. And the type of program I seek out are mostly mini-series, the type of serial drama that comes with limited number of episodes, frequently 12 to 15 episodes, and carries the storyline to a final resolution, as opposed to serial dramas with infinite narrative that carry on through multiple or endless seasons, particularly on the US primetime television. I think of, for those of you actually are familiar with US TV, in the 1990s, we have Law and Order, ER, NYPD, etc. Right? These are long-running, never-ending serial. And mini-series such as Rich Man, Poor Man, and Roots were popular in the US in the mid to late 1970s. And given that I'm in the UK, it is worth noting that the rise of US primetime mini-series, or some called short-form fiction, was actually inspired by the success of a BBC mini-series in the 1970s, such as Forsyte Saga, right? Came out in 1967, aired every Sunday for 26 episodes. So the the UK ones, the UK mini-series were actually a longer form of mini-series. And mini-series in the US gradually phased out in the 1980s and 1990s, partly as a result of the arrival of quality, long-running episodic or serial seasonal dramas, like the ones I mentioned earlier, such as NYPD Blue, that aired on a weekly basis. And my hunch is that miniseries is fast becoming one of the dominant original programming for long online streaming. And miniseries is simply more bingeable in terms of time and attention span. As I wrote previously while discussing dramatic programs on US network television, the structure of TV dramas falls into these four categories. And mini-series, thinking of Mayor of Easttown, The Squid Game, and The Chair, and with a finite serial narrative, as I observe and argue, has emerged as an ideal format during the era of binge watching. And the difference between miniseries and the ongoing serials rests upon the notion of narrative closure. And miniseries envisions a fixed number of episodes that comes with an ending, which arguably allows for better unity and more complexity in a self-contained story world. And the sense of ending also allows for more clearly defined beginnings and story directions, qualities that are hard to accomplish through the incremental releases of never-ending serial, because you really cannot foresee the ending, right? It can be challenging to convert the traditional seasonal and never-ending US primetime dramas to miniseries. But Chinese television dramas do conclude normally after 45 to 50 or so episodes, which actually makes the kind of conversion to miniseries easier to manage. And leading the charge in appropriating serial dramas for binge watch is, of course, we all know, Netflix. And Netflix promotes binge watching as the intended way to consume its in-house productions, which allows for consumption of serial dramas across 8 to 13-hour episodes in quick succession, leading to binge as a new normal, and miniseries with manageable length as one of the dominant narrative formats. Now, in a provocatively written book, Birth of the Binge, Serial TV and the End of Leisure, Dennis Bro argues that serial in the age of the internet is imbued with a density that teases, innovates, and hooks audiences into one of the new modes of entertainment in its purposely addictive nature, what we conventionally identify as binge. And similarly, less critically, Jason Mattel, in his book, Complex TV, describes binge mentality as comparable to the compulsive edibility of a bag of salty snacks, which captures Bro's less charitable appraisal of the addictive nature of binge. And in Bro's telling, the evolution of the serial model corresponds to the intensification of capital accumulation, particularly in the digital realm. His main critique is that the rise of seriality, both in the mood of continued story and binge watching, is emblematic of a larger changes, not only in television and the media industries, but also in the very form, content, and pattern of both work and leisure in the age of hyper-industrialism. It is worth noting that though only in recent years becoming a viewing phenomenon, binge watch as an option had become available since box set distribution recordings of content on VHS and then DVRs. And for those of us, who are old enough, we remember once upon a time there was a VHS actually, right? And by the early 2000s, video on demand services provided by cable services also become kind of available. But the adoption of binge watch was slow until Netflix came around, making viewing a mad dash for narrative payoff, right? That's exactly what Netflix wants to do, is promotes a particular kind of viewing, which is binge watch. And Bro argues that television seriality and binge watching have developed as part of this new model of perpetual 24/7 productivity or integrated work and leisure. And he calls this new narrative complexity with elevated addictive quality hyper-seriality. And he uses the term the attention economy to equate serial consumption with training workers in skills needed for the virtual economy through the lure and promise of leisure and relaxation or problem solving. So we're all trained to be able to follow in a certain fashion. And while Mattel, the author of Complex Television, uses the term of forensic fandom and drillability to describe a viewer devotion, Bro dismisses it as viewer addiction in the era of engineered attention economy. From the perspective of culture studies, Stephen Johnson celebrates this form of complexity as offering viewers a cognitive workout that increases audience problem solving and observational skills. In other words, the more you watch Netflix, the smarter you become. And when it comes to narrative structure and character building, Bro notes further that an addiction accelerates older narrational tropes. The cliffhanger becomes the multi-character cliffhanger. I would add to Bro's that we must now have mini cliffhangers at the end of each episode in order to propel the viewers to quickly click on to the next episode. Right? There's no kind of time span, and you just have to click on right away, right? And what we are witnessing is the multiplication and also intensification of cliffhangers, what I call collusion between serial dramas, addictive quality, and narrative intensity. And Amanda Lotz, from the perspective of industrial analysis, comes to the same conclusion by noting that unlike during the TV era, when viewers frequently treat a television program as mere kind of background, just a little background noise, right? Viewers devote more attention and focus on original Netflix programming because many Netflix series are complex and subtle, demanding concentrated viewing. So we have now entered the era of an actively immersed viewing practice, or maybe metaverse, as Facebook would like for us to live by or live for or live in. And I now want to shift gear to talk briefly about the longevity of serial narrative around the world, very, very briefly. A literally storytelling format dating back to the era of print medium, serial narrative has reinvented itself in numerous ways in the past decades, surviving successively the traditional TV network system, the rise of multi-channel cable and global satellite delivery, shifts in domestic and global regulation policies, ownership rules, and most recently, of course, the rise of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, now Disney Plus in the US, and Youku, Tudou, ByteDance, Mango TV, iQiyi, and Sohu in China. And as I noted in my earlier research, the US is not unique in its utilization of serial narrative on television. There has been an outbreak of serial dramas around the world since the 1970s, particularly in South America, Australia, the UK, and later in East Asia, with serial dramas dominating primetime programming in Hong Kong since the late 1970s, and in Japan since the late 1980s, and in Korea since the late 1990s. And primetime serial dramas from Mexico, Brazil, Japan, Taiwan, and Hong Kong became huge hits in China in the early 1980s, just as Chinese audiences began to encounter US primetime dramas on television. For those of you who knows a little bit of media history in China, there was a Garrison's Guerrillas 26-episode show with the clever Chinese title Dare to Die Squad, 家里生敢死队, right? Which was shown every Saturday at 8 p.m. on China Central Television in 1980, which is one of the very earliest US TV imports. And there was also the China debut of NBC's 1977 science fiction serial drama, Men from Atlantis, also in 1980, which was shown every Thursday evening at 8 p.m., again, primetime on China Central Television. The US serial and episodical dramas created a solid fan base in China. And so much so that in the mid-2010, when Chinese censors abruptly pulled the plug on these 4 US TV shows from online streaming in China, the move caused a stir among the dedicated Chinese viewers. In March 2014, the Chinese State Administration of Press, Publication, Radio, Film, and Television reissued 2 internet content regulation notices that the same agency had previously rolled out, which together aimed to root out domestic online shows with excessive violence and sex and required more vigilant pre-approval for online programming. Though the online content guidelines were mostly targeted at domestic programs, Chinese social media users quickly began voicing concerns that their access to US shows might be jeopardized. Viewer backlash was clear in an online poll conducted by Sina in March 2014, in which more than 130,000 respondents, or 95% of those polled, voted against the banning US TV dramas, which prompted the government to come out and clarify that no, the regulations would not apply to foreign programs, right? And the regulators the inaction on foreign exports agitated domestic content providers who appealed to censors for fair treatment so that they would be able to compete with foreign producers on equal footing with the same amount of violence and sex by retaining, kind of juicy contents in their programming. And by April 2014, the Chinese President Xi Jinping launched a campaign to rid internet of porn, rumors, and other unruly contents, which soon saw the ban of the 4 US TV dramas. So these 4 dramas become the collateral, so to speak. And in response to the ban, the Chinese viewers took to social media to openly mock and ridicule censors. The outpouring of disbelief and outrage recalled another incident 3 years before, in 2011, when censors removed Avatar from China's 2D theaters to make room for China's heavily promoted domestic film, Confucius. Chinese fans rose to Hollywood's defense, publicly snubbing Confucius. Even the China Daily chimed in, ran an article with the headline, "Confucius loses his way," accompanied by the satirical cartoon, just a really funny cartoon on China Daily. The Chinese fans of Avatar had a key ally on their side at that time, which is the market. Many theaters driven by bottom line simply ignored the government's order to remove Avatar. The government eventually backed down, restoring Avatar to more screens. And back in April 2014, such a victory, in April 2014, 3 years later, such a victory was nowhere in sight. The reason, again, had to do with the bottom line. Both producing and distributing now, the Chinese streamers wanted to keep a lion's share of the massive domestic market, online market in particular, to themselves by cultivating their own fans instead of siding with the fans of the US or UK shows. Regardless of the tension, US TV dramas and comedies have been popular in China. establishing a fan base for the eventual arrival of non-linear and non-synchronized online dramas promoted by Netflix. And here's a brief history of Netflix. The company was launched in 1997 as a mail-order DVD sales and rental service. It introduced a monthly subscription model in September 1999, dropping the single rental model by early 2000, and has since kept the flat fee unlimited monthly subscription model. It started streaming services in 2007 and ventured into acquiring exclusive original content by March 2011. And it debuted the hour-long political drama House of Cards in February 2013 to critical acclaim. At the time of the ban of the 4 TV shows in China in 2014, the Netflix show House of Cards created a viewing frenzy in China. Right? That's kind of very curious. The 4 banned shows pale in their depictions of violence, sex, political scandal or transgression when compared to House of Cards. So it turns out political economy rather than culture and morality dictated access. By creating a sensation in China, House of Cards came out to critical acclaim in the US, elevating Netflix onto the pantheon of quality programs akin to cable era shows such as Mad Men and Breaking Bad, which appealed to quality demographics. So that is what we refer to as educated audiences with disposable income who can and are willing to pay monthly premium for exclusive contents. Together with exclusive content, quality demographics helped burnish cable channels' quality brand. And the introduction of tablet technology in 2010 further allowed for the very fluid movement of content among an array of screens, with mobile phone emerging as the dominant viewing gadget, particularly in East and Southeast Asia. And since web series are made available online on multiple platforms, they can theoretically reach a global audience who enjoyed option of accessing shows on the go and at the time of their choosing. That is, if geopolitical restrictions do not interfere with the virtual circulation. Well, the question is the virtual world borderless? VPN has played an interesting role in facilitating cross-border virtual traffic. Internet and Netflix knows how to leverage VPN. Netflix's internal policies on VPN use can be divided into roughly 3 periods. The first phase of internationalization between 2010 and 2014 was characterized by a relatively permissive attitude, right? So essentially, yeah, Netflix has encouraged you to get on, therefore you can see my show, right? And the second phase between 2014 and 2016 witnessed growing external pressure for Netflix to adopt stricter policies, right? And VPN provided many happy hours of streaming until Netflix introduced an anti-proxy policy in early 2016 and installed a new VPN detection technology and committed or recommitted to geo-blocking as a principle. So why the change of attitude? Well, the mid-2010s was a time when Netflix began to expand into the international markets, capturing over 80 million subscribers in 190 countries by 2016. But local barriers have persisted. As the media scholar Ramon Roberto puts it, Netflix's metamorphosis into a global media provider has not been hassle-free. So these are, the obstacles it has run into. But Netflix has continued its global trial, as Roberto writes, to cater to local tastes. The company has licensed thousands of non-US titles for its increasingly diverse user base and has invested billions of dollars in producing its own content in 30 national markets. that caters to geographically distinguished, kind of differentiated local subscribers. Global market has become increasingly important to Netflix in recent years. Indeed, during the second quarter of this year, 2021, the growth of its net subscriber came mostly from overseas, while the company actually lost customers in the US. As Netflix reaching a plateau in North America this year, Asia has emerged as its most vital growth market. More than half of Netflix's 4.2 million new subscribers in the third quarter of 2021 came from Asia Pacific region. And now let's talk about Netflix's China history, which is very short. Netflix's China ambition began soon after its push for internationalization in 2010. The company scored its initial success in China with House of Cards, as we mentioned, and the show makes the first time that a major US production put China at the center of its narrative. China factors heavily in the second season of the show, with the Chinese princeling functioning as a pivotal character and his ability to influence Washington politics, an instant upgrade of the usual images of meek, peripheral Chinese characters in most US films up to that point. Of course, things have changed so much since then. It is reported that House of Cards' largest proportion of the Chinese viewers came from government sector employees, the Chinese government sector employees, with prominent CCP leaders publicly endorsing the show, much like Jiang Zemin endorsing Titanic a number of years ago. So as I wrote for China Fire back in 2014, turns out the Chinese censors scrutiny over media content in its repeated campaign against the sex and violence and in political transgression is not really about morality as it is about politics. And Netflix's effort to enter the Chinese market have been flawed, despite the success of House of Cards, which left a mark in popularity as well as influence on the development of China's nascent original web series. But Netflix's subsequent effort trying to enter the Chinese market have all failed. In an announcement for Global Switched On in 2016, China was one of the very few places that was left out on Netflix's map of global conquer. Netflix eventually inked a deal in April 2017 with iQiyi, one of China's leading professional content providers, to distribute selected Netflix content on the iQiyi platform. Now, let me shift the gear to talk a little bit about iQiyi, a much more diversified platform than Netflix. iQiyi is the leading video streaming service in China, owned by Baidu. As you all know, which is China's largest search engine. While operating a core subscription service, iQiyi also maintains a major ad-supported video service, it's kind of similar to a YouTube, a gaming business, internet literature and comics platforms, and e-commerce for entertainment-related merchandise. So iQiyi is much more broader than Netflix in terms of its program. And iQiyi became the second most successful streaming service in China by the end of 2012, 10 years ago, and the leading online video platform in China by the end of 2013. Serving most of its users via mobile devices was kind of roughly around the US $5 a month subscription fee. iQiyi offers a wide range of contents from imports, including popular K-drama and independent movies from various countries, to domestically made dramas, animations, sports, and news. Most of its initial content was licensed from abroad, so foreign programming was crucial to the company's initial success, particularly among the upscale audiences, the so-called quality demographics. While government censorship began to cut into iQiyi's supply chain for foreign program, Baidu founded iQiyi Pictures in July 2014 to develop and produce original feature films and television programs. And by January 2019, iQiyi had become China's most popular streaming platform with 645 million hours watched, topping the totals of rival video giants Tencent and Alibaba's YouTube. And the 2017 deal iQiyi signed with Netflix stipulates that the US company must stream a limited number of iQiyi's original series. So these are the deal. And 4 months later, Netflix announced the plans to release its own Chinese language content. And by the end of August 2018, there were 42 Chinese drama and 42 Chinese movies screening on Netflix, ranging from original productions to traditional TV shows and also Hong Kong productions. But the kind of partnership eventually ended as many of Netflix's originals failed to pass the Chinese censorship. Again, as Roberto puts it, digital distribution does not come over the top of culture. It must negotiate the rough terrain of markets characterized by fundamental differences in tastes, values, cultural norms, viewing habits, income levels, connectivities, etc. So now let me shift gear to talk about the development of China's domestically grown web drama, which is informed by both China's own rich narrative tradition and by Chinese internet services exposure to miniseries from around the world, particularly Netflix in recent years. Early Chinese web dramas were what people in the West call low-budget comedy skits and sketches. Given that in the last 10 years, resources have been migrated from traditional TV to major video streaming platforms, the recent web dramas have been armed with bigger budget and cater to more affluent demographics. And the result is the arrival of professionally made dramas. So the second part is the recent and popular web dramas. Web drama has entered now an era of quality production in terms of the style, storytelling, and narrative structure, which shares much in common with serialized US dramas, and catching up or even replacing TV dramas to be the place for quality serial narratives. Young Chinese prefers watching videos on mobile devices, so TV drama and web drama have different audience demographics, which also can affect kind of the different trajectories of these dramas. And these are the characteristics of emerging web drama in China. And overall, the new wave of Chinese web series have followed the formulas established by their American, British, Japanese, and South Korean counterparts, with fast-paced plot progression, a mixture of serial and serious components, and complex characters. The most interesting recent development is that after years of long-running drama series, a new generation of compact web dramas, or what they call top thrillers, appeared on Chinese streamers, ushering now we call it so-called C-dramas into the face of miniseries since 2020, right, last year. As Han, writing for Six Tone, citing his piece, a 2018 research done by iQiyi suggests that the audience dropout rate for TV series beyond 45 episodes rose to 56% in the first quarter of 2018 from 47% in 2016. The percentage of viewers who finish the entire show is 4 times higher for shorter dramas than it is for longer ones. It makes sense, right? The previously bloated C drama was partly the result of the established pay structure in China. Again, the bottom line was at work. The practice has been for a long time in the Chinese TV drama industry is for TV stations and streaming platforms to purchase new dramas by the episode. So the past decade has seen producers deliberately inflating the number of episodes to increase profit. In February 2020, the National Radio and Television Administration in China formally called upon new televised and online dramas to limit the quantity of TV dramas to 40 episodes, and also encouraged producers to keep shows to under 30%, under 30 episodes, which contributed to the rise of miniseries, particularly the tightly woven original web drama, crime web dramas with compact narrative structures. Research suggests that miniseries in the first half of 2020 were almost all suspense thrillers in China. The genre played a key role in the rising of miniseries in China. And leading the charge in cultivating miniseries as a vehicle for crime genre is iQiyi. The company established in 2020 very interesting forums called Mist Theater, 迷雾剧场, Mist Theater, or Light on Theater, an online forum that showcases exclusively crime drama. It scored a victory with its second miniseries, A Hidden Corner, a suspense drama adapted from a popular novel, Bad Kids, that features 3 kids playing amateur sleuths as a defense mechanism against a corrupted adult world, which has implicated them in a series of crimes. The suspense genre is only a vehicle through which the seedy side of the Chinese society is exposed. Hidden Corner calls our attention to, amongst other things, the impact of corruption and domestic violence on China's youth. Let me play a clip, a trailer actually, for you.
有一天，农场里的狐狸要举办生日宴会，邀请3只小鸡来参加。
咱们又见面了。
3只小鸡为能不能去狐狸家里做客争论不已。鸡老二说：“不去了。”鸡老三说：“就给他写一封警告信吧。”鸡老大说：“
怕我打不过他。”
最后3只小鸡去到了狐狸的家里。
进来吧。
他们一进门，狐狸就把门关上了，把3只小鸡全吃了，剩下了一堆鸡骨头。
这个故事还有另外一个版本。
颜良回来了。
不用跑，不用跑，我们走。郑平，我希望你还记得你还有个儿子。
等你们长大就明白了。
不明白也得明白。
你们真是奇怪，写信威胁我，又不告诉我你想干什么。
打我爸，我能打死你！那是他爸爸。
你以为你很了解他吗？
快警察来抓你还抓我！
我的人生都被你们毁了，我还会再和你们报警。
你不是让我从小做一个诚实的孩子吗？
所以究竟是相信真相，是童话。
我是警察不知道。
所以你们选择相信什么？
It's a very interesting show. If you have some time to spare, I would encourage you to have a look. So up until recently, government control and regulation were not as strict on web drama as they were on TV drama in China. Web dramas were thus able to explore provocative topics such as teenage crimes, as in Hidden Corner. And such shows have come to exemplify seriousness in their thematic exploration and quality in their production. Hidden Corner premiered on iQiyi's Mist Theater on June 16, 2020, with 2 new episodes available for advanced streaming for VIP members on the 16th and the 18th at 8 p.m. The kind of scaling in fee structure met little resistance, which attests to the quality and thus popularity of the show. Normally, people would complain if you have this kind of scaling and fee structure. And the show opened for streaming in its entirety to all members starting June 18th. The show has been complimented for its trace of a more cinematic style seen in the US miniseries, which frequently equate with quality. In fact, Hidden Corner lists Joe Picasso, one of the screenwriters of House of Cards, as a script supervisor. The show also actually won a number of awards internationally. Oops, sorry. I have to try to get this thing off. Oh, no. Okay. So as this Guardian report tells us, the show stands out for its look and feel in terms of style, story, and character building. With a more mobile camera and less dialogue, the shift to less theatrical aesthetic traditionally associated with Chinese TV dramas was recognizable, despite its relatively slow pacing, a long-winded story development, which is apparently noticeable to my American students. I'm actually teaching a serial narrative course at Columbia this year, and some of my American students in the Columbia course complain, oh, this is kind of very slow, right? But much as the development of the US miniseries is closely connected to specific discourses about the UK period drama, the production of hidden drama can be seen as an attempt to improve the standing of web dramas in the cultural hierarchy under the sway of US serial narratives. Interesting to note that quality miniseries in the US usually has a quality pedigree. The shows might be adapted from an acclaimed literary work or featured renowned actors, directors, or run by a very famous showrunners. As in the case of Mayor of Easttown, starring Kate Winslet, and The Chair, starring Sandra Oh, and of course, House of Cards. Its debut episode was directed by David Fincher, right? And such is also the case with Hidden Corner in China. It features an ensemble cast, including several well-known actors in China, and lists as its executive producer Han Sanping, the veteran Chinese film producer and former head of China Film Corporation, which is the largest Chinese state-run film studio. While Netflix has cultivated development deals with known names big and small, from Obama to David Fincher, iQiyi too, at a much smaller scale, has contracted known figures in the Chinese film industry to develop shows that address pressing social issues. iQiyi Pictures recruited Wang Xiaoshuai, the Silver Bear Grand Jury Prize winner at the Berlin Film Festival, to develop a show called The Pavilion, which is a crime series. Wang Xiaoshuai reportedly said that he wanted to use iQiyi's crime drama as a vehicle to explore various social issues and to delve more deeply into subjects that might be harder to do in a feature film of limited time and space. Indeed, the subject matter of quality drama in both the US and China tend to be controversial, although what counts as controversy differs drastically. Regardless, Mr. Theater, the forum that showcases Hidden Corner, has created a niche for suspense thriller that sticks to the 12-episode model with varying episode length, being dictated by the logic of story arc rather than by the uniformity in length. Each episode actually has a different length, which is kind of refreshing. And building on the success of Mr. Theater, iQiyi announced in October 2020, the month its VIP subscribers reached 68 million, a new initiative to develop 2 additional genre-specific libraries for original contents, adding a romance-focused sweet-on theater and comedy-focused laugh-on theater into the mix. However, when it comes to global reach, the Chinese streamer has been slow to warm up to the global market beyond Southeast Asia. iQiyi only set up its international headquarters in Singapore in December last year to make its presence known in the Southeast Asian region. iQiyi released The Ferryman Legends of Nanyang, a Southeast Asian produced C-drama starring Lawrence Wong, the veteran Singapore-based Chinese actor, which is a kind of very recent development. And there are reported 2 new Philippines-produced series and 4 Korean language productions in the company's pipeline. Overall, though, political and regulatory barriers could be daunting for Chinese streamers to maneuver, both in China and elsewhere. In 2020, for instance, iQiyi shut down its Taiwan operation following Taipei's ban on deals with mainland video streaming services. Domestically, several popular shows were canceled and heavily edited during recent Chinese internet content crackdown. Domestic censorship now has global ramifications. For instance, the suspension of blockbuster variety show Youth with You season 3 in early May this year left audiences outside China hanging, which does not help build iQiyi as a trustworthy brand name. New guidelines were issued in September 2021 in China, urging streamers to vet their online content for a clean and healthy cyberspace. It remains to be seen how the tightened control might affect crime drama on iQiyi's missed theater. Meanwhile, Netflix has commissioned a big-budget English adaptation of the Chinese sci-fi novel, The Three-Body Problem, with several episodes reportedly being directed by Derek Chang, the Hong Kong filmmaker whose feature Better Days won an Oscar nomination last year. To wrap it up, what I have done so far is to kind of map out a rough terrain of milestone moments in the development of serial drama in China and the US, particularly the arrival of a miniseries in the era of online binge. What I intend to do next is to examine the kind of cross-cultural appeal of media products across diverse forms in geopolitical, geoeconomics, and geocultural regions, so as to tease out the political, economic, and also cultural ramifications of the rise of these boutique miniseries in the US and China, right? I'm particularly interested in how the development of miniseries kind of intersects with the dual forces of state censorship and market control, and how popular culture captures and in turn shapes China's kind of evolving state and society relations as the new generation of Chinese media practitioners navigate forces of state commerce and the continued overwhelming global presence of US media and popular culture. As I said, it's a very kind of raw new subject. So I welcome comments, insights, suggestions, or of course, questions. And thanks again for Steve to host this and for SOAS to allow me the opportunity to share this very kind of rough research topic with you.
Well, thank you very much, Ying. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. The one thing that I thought you might mention that you haven't actually mentioned is the fact that we have this news item coming out about Disney in Hong Kong today, and how Disney pulled its episode on China Tiananmen Square on The Simpsons. Perhaps somebody will take you up on that. What I wanted to ask you about is that you talk about Xi Jinping's intervention, that he wants a, what was it, clean and healthy cyberspace, as a result of which some of your popular US series were dropped, including things like Your Good Wives and your, what was it, NCIS and something else. What do we know about these particular developments? Did Xi Jinping know what he was talking about and doing? Did he actually watch any of this? How did he censor this if he had never actually even watched any of them? What are we talking about? Xi Jinping having a problem, or Xi Jinping just said something and then others implemented the censorship and those series became casualties?
You know, so we're talking about back in 2014 when China banned this for TV dramas, US TV dramas. I'm not sure if it is a direct causality. You know, it is not as if Xi Jinping come out and targeting this for dramas and say, okay, so this is not good, you know, let's cancel it. I think, you know, I mentioned it's also part of market censorship as well, right? It's not just a political censorship, it's also market censorship. And at the time, those shows, you know, initially, when the Chinese censors start to look into, in their mind, a very messy, chaotic cyberspace, say they wanted to do this kind of, they want to sanitize the online content, right? And so therefore, they have a serious regulation, and one of which is targeting at these dramas, right? So they want to promote a healthy and whatnot, healthy and uplifting content. And so the initial guidelines or regulations actually were targeting at the domestic content producers, domestic content generators. So they were not really targeting at the US, the foreign, the export, the imports, because the online platforms, they protested because they wanted to keep the market to themselves, right? So they thought, the regulation is not really that fair to them, because that means, they have to provide much more wholesome program than the US imports. How are you going to compete with, more juicy contents, right? So therefore they ask for more policy, better policy, fairer policy, and then so now they have that policy. So I'm not entirely sure though. So the 2014 the talk by Xi Jinping is actually came after as a part of a kind of a response to that. So that's a more of a broader based ban. Right, so that targeting both domestic content providers and international content providers. So that led to the casualty of these 4 TV dramas. The US 4 TV dramas, they're very clean. In comparison to House of Cards, they're nothing. Right, they're just so sweet. The Big Bang Theory, it's nothing, right? So yeah, I'm not sure. One can speculate whether Xi Jinping actually pays any attention to all these 4 shows. But what I know, because I do a lot of research on Hollywood films, I know that she is a big fan of Hollywood war movies, World War II movies, right?
That's interesting. Xi Jinping is a big fan of American World War II movies.
Yes.
Most of which present America in a particular light.
Right. So that's why Xi Jinping said, the Chinese filmmakers should really look to the American ones to learn how to make patriotic war films. And now you have these new films, right? You have the battle at Lake Changjin, right? And you had earlier World War II and 800, right? So yeah.
Okay. The floor is now open, and if you would like to raise a question or a comment, please use the Q&A box. If you would like to stay anonymous, please say so at the start of your question, but nonetheless, please provide some information for me to know who you are, which will help me to moderate. We have the first question, which comes from somebody who would like to stay anonymous. I've got 2 questions here. What are the impacts and influence of subtitling and audio dubbing and volunteers-led subtitling groups and the Douban's community trends? And what is their impact on the streamed and dramas in China? And then I'll come to the second question later.
So
subtitling first.
I'm sorry.
It's the subtitling bit first.
Oh, right. Okay. So what are impacts and influences of subtitling? And I'm not sure how many audio dubbing that's taking place these days. I'm not sure. But I assume you're talking about the English shows, right? The imports. We're not talking about the other way around, right? The traffic, is one way at this point, right? And you very rare have a Chinese TV drama crossover to the international market, right? So I assume you mean the English subtitling Yeah, I think, first of all, I'm not sure there are many audio dubbing anymore. People just do subtitling because it's much easier, more economical. Right? Once upon a time, though, for those of you who are familiar with the Chinese film history, and Shanghai Film Studio was very renowned for actually doing the dubbing for a number of classical Western films. But so back to the question here. Yeah, the sort of impact influence of story is very, very interesting because you are talking about and for the Chinese side, you have these volunteers, these young people volunteers to do the subtitling and then do it in such a fast speed, right? And so there's some at times there's bound to have some misinterpretation, right? Like in the US, there was a huge brouhaha when Squid was making the wave. The Squid Game, I'm sorry, the Squid Game, not Squid, the Squid Game, the Korean show. I assume you all watched the Korean show, the Squid Game, right? And so there was one crucial translation in the show that was kind of mistranslated. So a number of cultural critics who understand Korean language actually commented on that. So that's one thing, the role of translator, right? And their particular way of using words and so on and so forth will certainly have an interesting kind of impact. Someone has to do this research. And also it's kind of very interesting. That's actually the thing that I wanted to kind of look into. It's a very interesting phenomenon. You have such a group of enthusiastic young people who are just kind of willingly donate their time and energy to do the subtitling. And in fact, in the class that I'm teaching now at Columbia, it's a film program, and I have, I think, at least two students who are used to work, as volunteer subtitler. Just absolutely, it's an interesting phenomenon. I'm not sure if I answer these questions, but it's something that's really worth looking into. Especially we're talking about translation. Why? What do we mean by translation? How do we translate? Right? And what is the agency of the translators in interpreting certain things? Right? Make the translation.
Okay, I think you dealt with one side. There is also an unspoken side to your subtitling in China, which is how authentic is it? Politically, are they being careful about it, or that's not the case?
Okay, so I gathered you're talking about self-censorship here. So the subtitlers, whether they are very careful of what they say, I think it's inevitable. I should, I haven't done a real thorough research, but I'd assume that's when it comes to certain terms and certain words, one has to be very careful. I would assume that the subtitlers would exercise discretion. And certain things, words might be lost in translation, as it were. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, the second question from the same person is that could recent suppression of digital conglomerates with media interests, such as Alibaba and Tencent, and English tutoring in China, tell us anything about the future of iQiyi and also foreign language serial dramas in China?
That's a very good question. It's an open question, right? I think it's going to be tough if the situation continues. It's going to be tough. iQiyi will run into quite a number of roadblocks. So yeah. So the control, it's really the top-down control is really tightening. The leash is getting shorter and shorter. And like I said in my talk, particularly for a forum that's based on crime genre, right? How much can you do, right? If once upon a time, anti-corruption dramas was very popular in China, but the regulators came out, have a kind of a across-the-board ban on anti-corruption dramas, and that was the end of it. And a number of years ago, there was a ban on costume dramas, right? So yeah, it's going to be interesting cat and mouse game, right? And of course, as much as iQiyi and the number of Alibaba and Tencent were driven by commercial interest, they live in this larger political cultural ecosystem. So they would have to and be mindful of what they do if they still wanted to be in the business. Yeah, it's tough.
Okay, next questions come from Shao Chu Hu. Since you have mentioned TV series in the UK and the United States since the 1970s, Wu is wondering what your take is on whether the miniseries developed by iQiyi today is in any way comparable to Chinese TV series in the late 1980s, citing the example of 我爱我家, I love my family.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think I Love My Family, 我爱我家 is a sitcom, right? It's domestic comedy. It's a comedy, right? It's essentially, it's different from miniseries because it's ongoing, right? I think I don't, we have to look up the statistics. I don't remember how long 我爱我家 the show run, how many seasons, but I'd assume it's long, much longer. And when we talk about miniseries, we're really talking about a show that has a beginning and ending before it's released. Right? You produce a show, you produce the entire show and you release it. And so the show has a predetermined ending, right? And it may also, most of the miniseries I talk about is drama. They're not domestic comedies. So comedy is a entirely different ballgame. But I'm glad you mentioned that show. And once upon a time, Chinese television drama, including comedies, it was very vibrant actually in the 1980s, 1990s. Yeah, but I don't think they're comparable. The miniseries I'm talking about is really not the type of shows, just ongoing seasonal drama, seasonal domestic comedies like 我爱我家, I Love My Family. I hope this answers your question.
Well, I'm not the one who's raising the questions, but I thought there was another dimension to the questions, which is that the questioner was using 我爱我家 as a benchmark in terms of the quality of productions of TV series or TV dramas that people in China consume, always somewhat earlier and more vibrant era of the media. And whether your streaming services in China today is producing products of comparable quality. I thought this is the other dimension to the question. Would you like to address that?
Sure, yeah, well, absolutely. Because, in my 2008 book talked quite a bit, it's essentially a summary of the development of Chinese television drama and the subsequent 2 edited books that I did on TV drama. I kind of covered a lot of that already. But I would argue that the new mini-series produced by these streamers, right, with the so-called streamers, I particularly focus on Netflix, iQiyi in the Chinese case, and they really have a kind of a different, it's a different league. It's a different league. One of the slides I showed, how do you, that's another thing it's interesting to talk about, how do you measure quality, right? So what are the criteria, right? Is it cinematic enough? How do you do dialogue? Has a certain rhythm? Is it fast or slow? In general, Chinese television programs, much like Chinese films, were kind of slow paced. It's kind of very rooted in a kind of a Chinese narrative tradition. It's a very slow, kind of developing a leisure pace. And so these new breed of miniseries, 12 to 15 episodes that iQiyi is cultivating, and they're very compact and much more fast paced, and it's a lot more cinematic. 我爱我家 is basically, multiple cameras, like the so-called quality drama, they use kind of one camera, very cinematic. So that's really kind of different. And I again, so in short, to answer your question is, yes, indeed, in television, Chinese television produced a number of very interesting TV dramas in the 1990s and even 2000 and so on and so forth. But the new breeds of these TV dramas are much more compact and in line with this notion of quality that we kind of developed in the UK, in the US. But that, of course, that we can certainly argue, who is to say, what's in the cultural hierarchy, right? Who is to evaluate this, So that's kind of another dimension of the question. But just using the sort of what we consider as the so-called quality television and the new iQiyi and drama as a real interesting new breed. Yeah.
Well, the questioner actually has followed up on this and asked about, in fact, there were political satire in the 我爱我家 drama. Does that matter? And the other dimension to it is whether TV shows can go on. I mean, are they being squeezed out by all these streaming services?
Not really. I think actually it's the second question I'd like to ask you. So if TV dramas are still are they squeezed out by streamers? And they have different markets, right? So young people gravitate towards these new streaming platforms, right? And they tend to watch these new shows. And China more kind of a secondary, places, tertiary cities, and so on and so forth, rural area. Majority of these people still continue to gravitate towards primetime TV dramas provided by the broadcasters. So you still have audiences who watch dramas, TV dramas, right? And you have a lot of young audiences who have migrated into watching these streaming dramas, but the audience is still there to watch the traditional dramas on television. That applies to the US as well, actually, the UK too, right? And what was the first part of the question? I'm sorry, the other question you had a...
And that was about the use of political satire in the 我爱我家.
I need to
that was allowed in the 1980s TV dramas. Are they still there?
Well, yeah, again, so I think the room for doing more provocative topics is kind of shrinking. But when you look at it, so the Hidden Corner came only recently, right? And actually did do a number of very provocative, explore a number of very provocative themes. So, it's not a kind of straight yes or no. It's a lot of cat and mouse game and a lot of gray area too, right? And, creative practitioners always wanted to do something, right? Cutting edge, pushing the boundary, but they also have to be mindful and bear in mind too. So a lot of these pushing boundary is also market driven, right? They want to do shows that are provocative so that audiences can be drawn in, right?
Okay. Well, next question comes from somebody who would like to stay anonymous. So even though I don't quite see why it needs to be, the question is about your methodology, your research methodology. Can you share what your research methodology is?
Can I share with my methodology?
Yes. What is your methodology?
Okay, I'm exploring still because, like I said, I'm using this forum as a guinea pig actually. My methodology has always been, there's a comparative aspect to it, right? Throughout all my work, earlier television, film, and I look at, my interest is really kind of China, right? And also so the US, especially for my film work, right? Because there's a lot of kind of influence and a lot of actual one-way traffic, from US popular culture into China, the kind of influence. So that's the thing. So that there's always this kind of comparative component in my research. So it's kind of comparative, if that counts as methodology. And the other thing is kind of historical. Even though we're looking at popular streaming services, there's not much of history to speak of. We're not talking about back to Tang Dynasty, right? And Han Dynasty, and it's very short, but nevertheless, I'm very interested in the trajectory of this development. So my talk essentially is follows the kind of thread of thought that I have that counts partly as also, I suppose, methodology is looking at the development pattern on kind of Netflix and iQiyi, as their kind of counterparts and how they kind of interact, right? And eventually, and as I delve further into this, I think I will tease out more kind of political and cultural and ideological aspect of what I want to do. And again, it's a very early stage, but comparative and political economy, institutional history, and interplay between cultural, political economy, and also the narrative itself, and the style and aesthetics, narrative, storytelling, and so on and so forth. So these are all kind of a complex interplay among all these entities. That's what I strive to do. Even though this is just a very early stage, but I think it is a trajectory, if you will, that's there, I think.
Okay, next questions comes from Giorgio Cesarelli, who is doing a PhD at Lyon 3 University. The question is about the so-called IP films. At the beginning of the BAT, that's the Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent era, it seemed it was all going to be based on the implementation of IP for contents production. Do you see a resurgence of this phenomena, or has the switch towards quality production halted the use of IP and intermedia films or serial productions?
I think it's, they develop simultaneously, and at some, in some instances they collude with each other, because some quality dramas can be developed as an IP, right? One quality project can be an adaptation of an internet novel, right? And then later on it can be produced into, you can develop it into multiple after products, right? So that essentially is an IP. I mean, it's really, I don't see why they can exclude each other. They can work together. IP is a huge, it's a huge thing. Yeah, it's been going on for a number of years. But yeah, the trend will continue, right? It's how where the market goes, and how you leverage your intellectual property and make it into even more profitable secondary, third, tertiary market. Oh, absolutely.
Right. Next question, another anonymous questioner. Why do you think Chinese dramas are not so internationally popular, particularly in the West?
Yeah.
Why nobody watched The Great Wall? Why is it a flop? Even if it got Matt Damon in it.
Right. I actually wrote a piece about that. So the bottom line is, in films or television programs, for that matter, of overtly propagandistic and too eager to demand other people's attention or recognition, tend to fail. That's one thing. The other thing is, it's also about storytelling, right? And there's a language is also a huge barrier. For one thing, I think in Europe, people actually watch, to a certain extent, subtitled films, right? Or TV dramas, other media contents. But in America, which is the number one, well, actually no longer the number one market. The number one market is now China. So, but in the US for a long time, it was one of the largest film market, and people don't like to watch subtitled program. So language barrier is another issue, and Chinese TV drama is pretty much hews on to its own narrative tradition, which is kind of very leisurely paced, kind of slow, developing multiple characters, interested in interpersonal relationships, and so on and so forth. In all these, it might not be particularly conducive to international audiences who really wants to have these, fast-paced, very intense, very, at times very provocative dramas like the Squid Game, right? So I think the question really is, can China make a Squid Game? I guess you tell me, can China make it the Squid Game?
What's your answer to that?
You're asking her, or asking the student? Ask me. No, I don't think China can make it a Squid Game. Nobody would
And
dare
why?
to do that.
And why?
Okay, there's a violence, right? And there is the, I think as violence is a key thing, and there's a sexual content, right? There is a certain degree of political transgression, right? So again, it's the same thing, you know, House of Cards can only be made in the US.
Or in the UK, the original House of Cards was
Absolutely.
in the UK.
I forgot to give credential to the UK. It's all started in the UK. You're the mother of everything, right? So yeah, absolutely. So it's a very different. It's also interesting when we look at the difference between the UK one and the US one. The US one's a lot more sensational. The UK one's kind of more subdued, right, in terms of style, right? And you know, so the fact of the matter is, you know, China has so much, you know, a lot of juicy story when it comes to, you know, sex violence, political transgression, right? Gosh, it's just everywhere. But can you make a House of Cards? No, you can't.
Okay. Well, next questions come from a SOAS media and communications student. I hope I'm not murdering your name, Devashri Javenka. The question is quite long. I'll read it out to you. A platform like Netflix, which claims and boasts about diversification of contents across regions, has a specific Netflix aesthetics. An audience which when we log on to Netflix, we have perceived expectations which are built by Netflix as a platform. Do you think Netflix aesthetics as a platform hampers diversification of its contents across different countries?
Yeah, no, that's the problem of you using big data algorithm to generate, you know, certain in the so-called individualized info, kind of individualized little clue and cue for you. Oh, okay, so you know, for those of you who Netflix users, you sign in and ask you to, you know, who are you, because you assume that you share with the family, right? And so you click on you, right, and then there will be recommendation for you that should Netflix based on what you've watched before. It assumes that you will kind of gravitates towards certain show. It's all based on these big data and algorithm, is that actually kind of preempt you from being exposed to other shows, right? So therefore, the niche becomes even smaller, you know, sharper, right? So we are all kind of being kind of programmed, so to speak, into a little niche, right? So, you know, I think diversification is a funny term if we talk about you know, how these algorithm works and how these streamers utilize these data. In terms of, but on the other hand, Netflix does claim that it produces localized content, right? That caters to you know, diversified content that caters to localized taste. So that is Netflix's game, and it has actually put the so-called money in its mouth. So it does actually go to establish different production centers at various places to produce local shows, right? For instance, the Squid Game is you know, Korean production that's commissioned by Netflix, right? So they went to Korea and they want to make this. So supposedly it's a Korean show, right? It has certain Korean flavor, but it can also open wide, right? Caters to kind of broader audiences. So it's kind of an interesting conundrum and also interesting dynamic between kind of universal programs of universal appeal with localized flavored taste. And also actually Netflix has aggressively entered into foreign language markets. So it produces you know, local, you know, shows of local language. It's tried, you know, in the China case, although it failed. So yeah, it's a, you know, I'm not sure. I tend to be a little bit more critical about that in terms of where Netflix is taking us, much like Facebook, right?
Okay, next question comes from Poland, from Alicia Sanota. The censorship in China has affected what movies or TV shows are imported from the United States or international market. But has the opposite ever happened? Have the international trends in movies and TV dramas ever affected censorship laws and policies in China? For example, in making it less strict?
So, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, so the censorship in China, China essentially, the censors, they are the guardians, right? So they dictate what kind of films can be imported to China, right? So yeah, that question, yeah, they do, but has the opposite ever? So what does it mean? Opposite have ever happened?
Has the changes in how international movies and TV series are developing have the effect of making censors in China to behave more like human beings rather than just following orders from above?
I'm not sure I entirely can grasp it, because actually, if for the question really is not, the question really is, I think I would think it would be an interesting question to ask is, if the censorship in China managed to have ripple effects on the film and TV programs, dramas that we make elsewhere, right? Considering that China has such a huge market, right?
Now, that's one side of the question.
All right. So the other,
she's asking the other side of the question, which is whether the changes in the way how the rest of the world watch movies and dramas have any effect on how Chinese censors behave.
no, zero effect.
So they're good party men and women.
Just absolutely.
Okay. And what's your answer to the side of the question you raised yourself, which is how much has Chinese censorship affected how international dramas and movies are being produced in order to break into the China market?
So the film market and TV drama market are different because film opens wide, right? It has a more visibility and it's under very strict censorship rule. Of course, yeah. For I assume we're talking about Hollywood films because, right? So because these are the films that get to be imported to China and have wider distribution, or at least once upon a time, right? So yeah, of course, for the Hollywood films that the studios that want the film to open in China, they have to be mindful of certain things that that might trigger the certain triggers, right? So they will exercise self-censorship to make sure certain elements are not there. Therefore, they can have a very uneventful opening in China. Absolutely. So that's the ramification, a ripple effect of censorship in China in terms of film. In terms of television, I think it's a less obvious. But on the other hand, again, the censors regulators serves as a guardian, right? So they dictate what kind of programs can be imported to China. But on the other hand, because the Chinese TV market is relatively small and really is just the aftermarket for the TV producers in the US, so I don't think I have yet to see that production companies will make particular serial dramas that will exercise heavily self-censorship in order to enter the Chinese market, because the market just isn't there for these studios. In terms of TV and streaming platform, even in although it's interesting, House of Cards, which is kind of the second season, I mentioned that episode with featuring this Chinese princeling, right, who managed to influence politics in Washington D.C., right. And so that is a calculated success, but that has nothing, has less to do with censorship rather than adding certain appealing elements to attract audiences in China. At the time in China, actually, this is when all things was happening in China, lots of political scandals, right? So that actually came at the right time. But can a show like this be imported to China now? I doubt.
Okay. Well, next question comes from Norman Stockman in Aberdeen. could it be argued that the shorter miniseries allows for testing for audience success, which could pave the way for a second and subsequent series? An example could be The Handmaid's Tale. Was it a marketing device?
Yeah, it could certainly be. For instance, yeah, you could certainly make one mini series as a pilot, right? So so for instance, people are waiting to see whether there will be second season of The Chair, for instance, right? I think the Mayor of Easttown, is it done? Are we having more? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if a show it has generated enough enthusiasm and with support from financiers, and if the showrunner willing to keep on developing, the second season, third season, yeah, a mini series can be turned into something, more, have a longer shelf life. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, very last questions. I don't want to let you go without asking you about what happened with Disney when it removed the, I think 2005 or 2006 episode, which was about China, about Simpsons going to China in front of Tiananmen Square. Is it self-censorship, or has Disney been censored by the Chinese authorities?
No,
and what does it mean?
The answer is I don't know. You have yet to kind of dig into, have yet to see any real juicy gossip or revelation, right? And these entertainment industries increasingly tight-lipped about the so-called behind door, what's behind, what's going on behind the door. So without knowing more about this, I can't really answer the question. But okay. I should assume that it's a little bit both, self-censorship and censorship. I need to know a little bit more about that before I can answer. But I'm not surprised.
Okay, since we have about less than a minute or so left, what are your recommendations for Chinese drama? That comes from somebody who actually raised that question. Oh,
Hidden Corner. You should watch Hidden Corner, the one that I use as example. It's a, it really, and I have to say that it's an extraordinary show. Because I do this for a living, watching movies, watching TV, right? So I often find it's kind of a professional hazard to have to watch all that stuff, right? And I just, I groan, but Hidden Corner is delightfully bingeable, watchable. So yeah, go ahead, watch and watch Hidden Corner and see what it means. Yes. And as it's been a long time since I watched a Chinese TV drama, so I can't say more, but Hidden Corner is worthwhile.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that particular recommendation. I think we are hitting the magic time of 6:30, so let me draw this webinar to a close, and let me remind others that next week we will not be having a Monday webinar. Instead, we have a one-day virtual conference on the Wednesday. I hope to see some of you there. Thank you very much, Professor Zhu, and thank you to all of you who have taken part in this webinar, both as an audience and as a participant in raising questions and comments. Thank you very much. Good night. Goodbye.
Thank you.